The center's mission is to generate public awareness, advocacy, clinical applications, and cutting-edge research ideas that enhance the achievement and performance of children and adolescents with gifts and talents in all domains. Her recent publications reflect her scholarship on applications of psychological science to gifted education, talent development in specific domains, and psychological strength training for academically gifted children and youth. She has been supported in this work by the National Science Foundation and the Association for Psychological Science. Rena Subotnik, PhD, is director for the center, and the center's mission is to generate public awareness, advocacy, clinical applications, and cutting-edge research. And she is going to speak on, I'll have to refer to the abstract. Yes? Yes. Rena is going to speak on what are the psychosocial skills needed for young people to enhance their abilities into competencies, their competencies into expertise, and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, Rena Subotnik.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Rai, for your warm welcome. And it's very interesting for me that the speakers this morning foreshadowed a lot of what I wanted to say. Sometimes that's bad, but as we had a learning expert as one of the speakers, he will tell you, and you know, that repetition helps to reinforce. So I want to begin by telling you a story about a profound experience that happened to me as a researcher. My new job as an assistant professor, that was a while ago, not yesterday, gave me access to one of the best schools for the gifted in the U.S. Rumor had it, and in fact I reinforced this, was that it was more selective than Harvard University. Since the school was established in the 1940s for very high IQ children, I was hoping to show how a broad liberal arts education with intellectual peers would be reflected in the creative lives of graduates in middle age. After contacting approximately 2/3 of the graduates from that period, I found that they were generally contented with their lives, but not especially ambitious or creatively productive. And this is in spite of their childhood brain power, their educated parents, and the fact that they participated in the school. This outcome was extremely puzzling for me because as a gifted specialist, I'd been promoting exactly this kind of environment to meet the needs of this kind of child. Was this the optimal outcome for our programs? I didn't think so. And I hope to hear later what your thoughts are about an appropriate outcome for gifted programs. I dealt with the puzzle by seeking out answers from the literature and also counterexamples of gifted programs. I also turned to the work of my trusted major advisor in graduate school, Abraham Tannenbaum. He had, at that time, recently published some important work based on an exhaustive review of the literature. Let's look at his 5 factors necessary for fulfillment of potential talent, keeping in mind the results of the study I just told you about. So, the first factor is G factor, or IQ, which is essential to some degree. But he was also saying that not all domains require the same amount of IQ. So in the school, IQ was there. The students had, at a minimum, a 97th percentile. on an individual IQ test. The second factor is educational opportunity. And certainly the environment was very supportive, and it was highly enriched both at home and at school. Because as I mentioned, these students came from families that were, had a lot of human capital. However, what they didn't have were the other three factors. Special domain ability was not developed. In fact, it was discouraged in the name of well-roundedness. The fourth is he introduced the whole notion of chance, that everything isn't prescribed in life and that chance plays a role. But chance is not something that we have no control over. We can also take advantage of chance opportunities, and helping students to see that when chance comes along, to be prepared to take advantage. And this was not ever done at the school. In fact, the environment was designed to be as predictable and as unstressful as possible. Finally, at no time was there discussion or guidance as to how to engage with critique, how to deal with uncertainty or with inevitable social and academic comparisons among peers. Happily, I had one of those chance opportunities to visit Juilliard, one of the world's most prestigious music conservatories. Now, I'm keeping in mind what Dr. Chatterjee said, that music was not the most important domain to focus on right now in India. However, if you remember that in the music world and in the sport world, a huge amount of money has been invested in talent identification and talent development. And we're really mistaken if we don't look to these different domains to find out what we can learn from them. And so I'm not musical, so I went in there not to evaluate the program, but to learn from it as much as I could. And what I found was that working with children and adolescents, they were treating their gifted students the way we treat doctoral students. So admission criteria were based on performance, on an audition, not an abstract test, which was one of the points that was brought up earlier. And in fact, if you look online, you can see that for the children's program of Juilliard, they will say for 5-year-olds and piano, when you audition, you must have mastered this. This is totally different from the idea of an IQ test where items are not to be shared. Nobody's supposed to know what's on an IQ test. So different conception of that. Every child in a music conservatory has at least 1 hour a week that's individual with the teacher. And so the teacher knows the student's strengths and weaknesses and makes a plan accordingly. There's accountability for meeting benchmarks. So every year, at the end of the year, there's what's called a jury, and you play in front of the entire faculty. And if you're not successful, or they don't feel that you've made progress, you don't stay. This is not what usually happens in a gifted program, in an academic gifted program. And then the fourth component that I'll bring up here was really interesting to me, that every department had what was nicknamed Reality 101 class. And that was usually taught by an agent or somebody who was a gatekeeper to the music world. And in that class, you would be taught how to dress, how to get patrons, how to get a headshot, your photograph, all of the practical things that you needed to know. And also advice. On one class, they were talking about gossiping. And I thought, what's this going to be about? And this was the agent for Renee Fleming, who's wonderful opera singer, and the agent said, "I'm not your mother, and I'm not talking to you about gossiping for moral purposes. This is entirely instrumental. This is a small world. The music world is a small world, and if people hear that you're saying bad things about somebody, that somebody may someday have a job or, you know, an opening, and you will not get it. So don't ever gossip or say bad things." I thought this was just incredibly fascinating that this was taught explicitly. So it wasn't just if you happen to have a good mentor, a good teacher, or a parent who knew the inside. So I want to share 4 lessons that I learned from these 2 research studies. One is that abilities matter. So IQ is important, but it's not sufficient, especially in that we really need to focus on specific domains. In fact, at some point, you have to be gifted in something, not just smart, be smart. But if not IQ, what would you use in identifying potential? And these questions came up earlier today. Performance areas like sport or dance have invested a lot of time, energy, and thought into this. For example, in dance, and I'm curious, I'm not sure whether it would be true cross-culturally, but in the Western ballet world, the 3 basics would be physical proportion. You have to have a certain body type. You have to have flexibility. I'm sure that's true with the classical Indian dance too. And also excellent physical memory. So in other words, you can see a repetition of movements, and you could do it right away, you could do it backwards, you could start in the middle, whatever. So this is these are very special abilities. In music, it's musicality, or the ability to express the music in an interesting, meaningful, and engaging way. We're learning a lot about early signs of giftedness in math, but we don't know a lot about early signs of giftedness in science. Here's a hint. One prestigious competition in the US called the Intel Science Talent Search uses a form of audition. It's kind of interesting, where the finalists for the competition go in front of a panel of eminent scientists, and they're asked to respond to some unforeseen situation where they have to apply their knowledge and their reasoning. So one of the students that I had mentored in a psychology experiment was baffled by this because it was a chemistry question. What happens if you drop a frozen raspberry in a vat of petrol? So, you know, you wouldn't learn that, but it was a reasoning question using your background. So we do need more work on identifying the basic components of other domains of ability, and this is a really promising area of research. Think about it. If you were to have an audition instead of an IQ test for your program, or in addition to an IQ test, what would the elements of such an audition be? Now, I said abilities matter. Why would I say something so obvious? And this was alluded to this morning too. We're here because we care about gifted children. In America, at least, there's been a slew of bestsellers that tap into a deep anti-individual differences vein, especially in the education community. Some examples of book titles that have been bestsellers: Talent is Overrated by Jeff Colvin, or The Genius in All of Us by David Schenk. And there are dozens of these. The arguments made in these books is that great performance